So this morning we're talking about picnics and ants. And this might sound a little sacrilegious, but when I started to think about this idea of ants, that old Pink Panther thing came back to me. Da-dam, 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 da-dam. Okay. So I don't know about you, but I love picnics. And I always just love just taking my food outdoors and feeling the fresh air as I eat. And I remember as a girl, it was always a big deal when we went on picnics. We packed the picnic basket and we went out to the park and we play in the park and we'd run and do whatever, and then we would eat our food and we'd run and do whatever again, and then we would go home and we felt fed. We felt physically fed, we felt spiritually fed. It was just a great feeling. So I like that. And as you know, I have learned to take almost anything as a metaphor in life and to interpret it metaphorically and metaphysically. So the idea came to me about ants at the picnic. You know, we often think of life as a picnic, do we not? Some of us are living life as a picnic, and others of us wished we could live life as a picnic. But even picnics have ants. Even picnics have something there that brings us to the point of going, it's not perfect. But yet, what would a picnic be without ants? What would a picnic be if we didn't have the ants? So what is an ant anyway? Well, I want to metaphysicalize it. I would say an ant is another negative thought. You know, everything in life is about, we want it to be light and love and joy and beauty, and we practice trying to make it light and love and joy and beauty. But doggone it, those negative thoughts just keep on creeping in, don't they? And not only do they creep in, we have these little habits of negative thoughts. Not only do the thought itself, but we have made habits around them. So if something happens, then there goes that ant again. So there's nothing negative about habits. Habits are a way that we have come to function so smoothly and customarily that it just kind of flows and we don't think about it. It's okay to not to think about some things. But then some things we really do need to think about, or else we do get caught over into that negative side. So if you want to look at the idea of picnics, I've got 3 points I want to talk about. Number one, that picnics have ants. They just do. And number two, that you can't blame the ants for ruining the picnic. And number three, ants are God's creation too. So first we'll look at this idea of picnics have ants. Not only do we have negative thoughts, those negative thoughts can become pesky. Charles Fillmore talks this way about pest in Revealing Word. He says, all vermin and pests of every kind come from wrong thoughts and expressions of life in man by man. God is life, and all life springs from the one perfect life idea. Man brings the life of God into manifestation through his thoughts, words, and acts. Through ignorance and wrong thinking, man has worked out of divine order with the great principle of life and has brought about the different manifestations of life that prey on and torment him today. Well, you know, there are fire ants, and there are black ants. And you know, ants have been around for thousands and thousands of years, and they actually are everywhere on our planet except Antarctica and a few islands. Did you know that? And there's over 25,000 species that have been named, and there's a lot of them that haven't been named. So they have been there long before us, and they'll be there long after us, perhaps. So ants have a reason for being here. So back to that idea of habits and negativity. What habits can you think of that might be a little bit negative? When you hear the news, what happens? Where does your mind go? When somebody tells you something that is negative, where does your mind go? If you're in habitual thinking, I would say that it just might go to the ants at the picnic. It happens. We're human. The thing is to learn to train our minds and continue to train our minds into the positive thought patterns. So, you cannot blame the ants for ruining your picnic. There was a phrase that I picked up when I went to listen to a group of people talk about what's going on in racism and the problems that we're having right now. And the phrase is no blame, no shame. No blame, no shame. So, there is a story that comes to my mind when I think about you can't blame the ants. And the story comes from chapter 41 in Genesis. And it's a story of Joseph and Pharaoh and the dream. You know, if you can remember this story, Pharaoh had a dream and nobody could interpret it. And Joseph was in prison. And he had interpreted some other people's dreams, and they remembered that. And they told the Pharaoh, Pharaoh, get Joseph. He knows dream interpretation. And so in the dream, Pharaoh saw 7 fat cows, and then he saw 7 skinny cows who ate up the cows. And then he went back to sleep, and he had another dream. And in that dream, he saw 7 fat grains of corn, and then he saw 7 skinny grains of corn that ate up the corn. And so it was the idea of there was feast and famine. Joseph interpreted that dream as God saying to Pharaoh that there would be 7 years of feast and 7 years of famine. You know, it is a cycle of life. It is a cycle of life. We want it all to be the picnic, but every once in a while the ants creep in. Famine, according to Charles Fillmore, is a lack of faith in God's power to prosper. You see, even though we know that we're prosperous, even though we know that God is the power, and that power lives within us, and we can apply that power anytime that we lift our thoughts up to God, we forget about it. We go into that famine state where we have to live out in our humanity and sit with the ants before we come back up into that positive state. The next point I want to make is that ants are God's creation too. You know, ants do what ants do. You can't blame an ant for being an ant. You just can't. So one of the things that was also in the Bible, in Proverbs 6, chapter 6, we read, "Go to the ant, you lazy bones, consider its ways and be wise. Without having any chief or officer or ruler, it prepares its food in the summer and gathers its sustenance in the harvest. How long will you lie there, O lazy bones? When will you rise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands and rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed warrior." So, we hear that we can have it all, and that includes the ants. We can have the negative thoughts. But if we hang out in the ants at the picnic instead of the picnic and the ants, what happens? We've gone to that that place where we've let our habitual thinking take us into that place where it's the ants' fault we're not having fun anymore. Who's responsible for our thoughts? We each are responsible for our own thoughts. One of the things that I was given as a gift as a child was a book, and I don't even remember where I got it from, and the book was a book on insect life. Now, I never really wanted to be an entomologist. I just had no desire to do that. But as I read this book, and I couldn't tell you who the author was to this day, what it was a study of different types of insects' life, like the ant, like a fly, like the bee, whatever. And I was maybe 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, and I would just read a little bit of it. But what excited me was that at some point I thought of these insects as something that was not beneficial to me. I thought of these insects as something that I wanted to not be around. Let's get the ants out of my kitchen. Let's get the bees out of my bonnet. Let's get the flies by the fly swatter. Let's just get rid of all those pesky ants. All those pesky pests. But when I read this book, even as a child, I began to understand that when you study anything, it has a gift for you. It shows you something very important about life, about your own life. So what do we know about ants? What we know about ants is that one goes out looking for food. He smells the food. And on his way back to tell everybody else where the food is, he leaves a trail of a smell so that they can find it. And ants are industrious, and one by one they're going to come and find their food. And do they carry off a little crumb? No, they're industrious. They don't want to have to make that trip 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, right? So they put a huge crumb on their back. The other thing that they do is they're making sure that everybody in their community has enough food. So by carrying a huge crumb back, what they are doing is making sure that not only are they fed, but there are others in their community being fed. It's a wonderful lesson when you think about it. And it's just a little crumb from a great big cake, which you probably will be leaving crumbs from afterwards anyway. How could you miss it? Why not love the ants? Why not be willing to study what they bring to you? Now back to the idea of habits. You see what happens when we get to that place of doing things habitually, whether it's even a healthy habit or whether it's a habit you don't wish to have, a negative habit, is that we get to that place where we fall asleep. And we just allow life to take over and pass us by. So we take a nap at our picnic, right? We get in the hammock, we take a nap. And when we wake, are we really refreshed? Only if we really awake. The Dalai Lama has been known to say that he spends 4 hours every day, not in meditation, although we would call it meditation. He calls it mind training. You see, when we become awake, as they do in Buddhism, as the Dalai Lama has, it is an idea of training our thoughts so that we're not stuck in those negative habits. Now, I've got to tell you, I don't know about you, but I think the Dalai Lama has accomplished lifetimes of work and still had 4 hours every day to prepare to do that. So what's prayer life like for you? 5 minutes maybe, 10 minutes, a half hour? You don't have time for it? You do it on the fly? You do it as a habit so your mind's not awake while you're doing it? Life is so full. Charles Fillmore says this about habits. When you refuse to see negative things, they will disappear, and you will be surprised to see how you will change your mind, body, and affairs as their expression of your thoughts. So if you are not happy, if you don't like the ants, change your mental habits. Make it a mental habit to be awake and not asleep. So make friends with the ants in your life. They don't eat too much, so you have a negative thought here and there. Don't try to be such a good metaphysician that you resist those negative thoughts. Make friends with them. They're there to teach you. Cover your food to protect it, if you really want to protect it. An ant's going to be an ant. Cover your brain thoughts if you really want to protect them. That negative is going to come in, but don't let it live there. But if you really want to share your food for thought, then share it. Share it. That's your choice. Elevate your food to protect you. In Mysteries of Genesis, Charles Fillmore says that the tendency to plead to be allowed to keep old habits of thought on the ground, that there is something good in them, is a characteristic of man's early stages of development. We tried very hard to save some of our secret habits and sense thoughts. I don't do that to you. Error must be wholly wiped out of the consciousness of, and the sooner we consent to accept that fullness of regenerative law, the sooner we shall enter the kingdom. You see, that kingdom is knowing the truth and being in the truth. That is where we can be in harmony with life, all life, including the ants. So I say to you, acceptance is the first step of harmony. When we try to resist, whether it's the pesky ant or any thought that we have that we're not fully in alignment with, we are not in harmony with ourselves. And if we are not in harmony with ourselves, how can we expect to be within harmony with others? So would you like your life to be a picnic? Then expect the ants and use their presence to move you to the higher ground. God bless you.